I think the president is frustrated with the fact that he negotiated in good faith with the Democrats and they went out to try and spike the football and make him look bad. I would have taken offense at that. I don't anticipate a shutdown in September, but if negotiations, if the Democrats aren't going to behave any better than they have in the last couple of days, it may be inevitable. If we get to September and it's still business as usual, business as usual, business as usual, nothing changes, and it takes a shutdown to change it, I have no problem with that.
The president disparages it in a way that's destructive, essentially saying, let's have a shutdown.
I guess maybe some of the victories we had in this CR, in this omnibus, is maybe getting under the president's skin a little bit. Who knows?
Well, the spending bill hasn't even been voted on yet, but Democrats are claiming success, Republicans defending what's in this bipartisan piece of legislation, and you heard the president's budget director. Also, the president tweeted this morning, the reason for the plan negotiated between Republicans and Democrats is that we need 60 votes in the Senate, which are not there. We either elect more Republican senators in 2018 or change the rules now to 51%. Our country needs a good shutdown in September to fix mess. That's what they were referencing there. Let's bring in our panel. Charles Hurt, opinion editor for The Washington Times. Julie Pace, White House correspondent for the Associated Press, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Julie, it seems clear, reading between the lines, that the president wasn't happy with the reaction and probably sent people out to make that case.
Yeah, I think what had the president more frustrated than the idea of Democrats being out there selling their victories is the idea that there were people questioning the deal that he made and saying that he got rolled, that he gave up too much. He's hearing that from a lot of conservatives today.
To the guy to your left, actually.
This gentleman in particular. And I think that's what bothered him. And so you saw this whole elaborate rollout today at the White House where you had Mick Mulvaney out there in multiple formats actually defending this deal, defending the idea that the president would then be willing to perhaps shut down the government in September if he doesn't get a better deal, which is a really extraordinary thing to say, especially when you do have this current spending bill that hasn't even been voted on yet. You haven't even really gotten through the finish line on this one.
Right, and that's a key point to make. This vote hasn't even happened yet. Here is the president and his Homeland Security Secretary on the border issues in this bill.
We achieved the single largest increase in border security funding in 10 years. So we have more money now for the border than we've gotten in 10 years. So the Democrats didn't tell you that. They forgot.
They're rejoicing in the fact that that wall will be slower to be built, and consequently our southwest border under less control than it could be.
Charlie.
Well, assuming that this bill does pass, and I think it's safe to assume that it will, this is not what Republicans got elected to do, and it's not what voters elected Donald Trump for. But what I do think that the good thing that I do think is coming out of it right now is the fact that this tweet that Donald Trump sent out about the showdown, I think is actually arguably a very smart strategy, because it turns the focus. You know, maybe they have to do this in order to get into the fall, but then he is turning his focus onto Democrats, and he needs to do that. The thing that we got coming out of the first failure of the health care bill was that Donald Trump was focusing all of his ire on the Freedom Caucus. That does not help him in the long run. It does not help Republicans in the long run. He needs them. And so I think that if this means that they turn the focus onto Democrats, onto the 2018 elections, and then play a game of chicken over real issues with the next threat of a government shutdown, might not be a bad thing.
Dangerous, but
very dangerous.
I think the major threat is not of a shutdown. As Rich Lowry pointed out in National Review, it doesn't matter. I mean, normally you'd be consistent and say the party in power holding the White House would get the blame for a shutdown. Well, it doesn't work that way. It turns out no matter who's got the White House, if it's a Democrat or a Republican, the blame always ends up on the Republican side. The media are set on that. It's not going to change. So it's not a big threat. I think the big threat is the nuclear option on the filibuster. Look, I think if you're a realistic Republican, you're going to say The next time the Democrats have the White House, they are probably going to pull the trigger on that.
Let's just explain that. They moved on the nominations, and including the Supreme Court nominations, to the nuclear option, which is 51%. But Senator McConnell, the majority leader, has said he would not do that for regular legislation, for every other bill. President Trump is saying we should look at that.
Look, I respect McConnell. He's an institutionalist. He thinks it would be a radical revision of the rules. It would be. However, if you look back over the last half century, the filibuster has been unbelievably abused. It was meant to be used for extreme measures, changing the social landscape like civil rights. It was not for every bill. Right now, every bill needs 60%. That's not the way a democracy is run. That's not the way our government was run for 200 years. So it's not the end of the world, and I think it's a realistic thing to do. If you control the White House and the Senate and the House and you can't get anything done because you're 8 votes short of 60%, who invented that number? I think it's a reasonable thing to do is to threaten and say, you want to play this game? You're not going to compromise. You're going to be in the resistance, as Hillary says, against everything that Trump proposes. Well, we'll drop the nuclear option on you, and then we'll be able to pass our legislation. That's what I would do if I were Trump. It is only a tweet. I don't know how serious it is, but it's the right strategy. Shutdown is not a strategy. Nuclear option is a strategy.
You know, Senator Ted Cruz would say that the shutdown battle that back in 2013 that ended up going to a shutdown was said to be cataclysmic for Republicans, and they ended up picking up seats in 2014. I want to turn to health care, Julie. This is Kevin Brady on the hunt for health care votes that may still be coming this week.
I think we're making progress. We ought to let consensus drive the timing on this. Let's get people to the right place for the right reasons. Members are really taking this seriously and studying. I've seen all these announcements on the whip count as well. I don't think they're accurate, but we're having the right, healthy discussions. So let them continue. Let's work till we get common ground on this.
Well, here's the Wall Street Journal. House Republican leaders are on the brink of losing too many GOP votes to pass their health care bill, overturning much of the Affordable Care Act, potentially dashing hopes raised by the White House of a big legislative win this week. At least 21 House Republicans have now said they oppose the latest version of the Republican plan to overhaul the health care system, with an almost equal number publicly undecided on the bill. I mean, this is kind of on a razor's edge here.
It really is. Last week, when you talked to White House officials, they felt very confident that they would be able to get a vote this week. When you talk to them yesterday and today, they sound like they're a bit more skeptical. I talked to a senior White House official who thought that they're about 5 votes short in the House, but they said that could become 0 or that could become 15. They just don't know what direction that this is going to go. And to our earlier discussion on the nuclear option, I mean, this really underscores that the president's problem is not necessarily just the Senate. If he can get a bill to the Senate, then the nuclear option becomes a problem. But in this case, it's not even clear he's going to be able to get health care out of the House.
There is a real concern about pre-existing conditions. The president was asked about this. Now there's another factor in this that crosses cultural lines. Jimmy Kimmel, with a very emotional a story about the birth of his son and concerns about that. I can identify directly with it. It's almost the exact same story as my son, Paul. He makes the case, Charles, that no family should have to worry about seeing their son or daughter die. He does not say it's Republican or Democrat, but obviously it's been taken to be concerns about pre-existing conditions in making this case.
I think it was a pretty unsubtle. Look, I sympathize with him. He's a dad. This is a traumatic event, and I understand. But if you want to turn it into a political issue, you should be a little more subtle about it. He implied, basically, that the Republicans want to watch these kids die. He didn't say that, but that was the implication of being cruel and unfeeling. The fact is that the issue is completely distorted. This is not an abolition of the protection for pre-existing conditions. This is a waiver for states, and it's not that you are denied if you have a pre-existing condition. The question is, and it's a subtle one, it's a difficult one, a complicated one, who pays for the extra cost? Is it going to be the people who share your insurance in the pool, which makes it really hard for everybody else? Or if you create these pools that Paul Ryan and others have talked about that used to exist, that states would set up, and they would put a lot of money into it, then you would have the taxpayer do that. I think the logic is to have the cost shared across the range by having everybody through their taxes supporting these extra costs, so that you don't raise the premiums for people in the pool with you to the point where other people can't get insurance. So that, I think, is the basis of the argument. It's not, are you going to let these kids die or not? It is, which is the most logical way to cover people with pre-existing conditions.
And quickly,
the debate is distorted, and that's really a tragedy.
Quickly, Charlie, former President Obama weighed in on Twitter, saying this is why they created ACA. The big thing is that the insurance, most people get it through their employer, and that linkage to employment is often seen as part of the issue, because you can't lose your job and then transfer your insurance to someplace else.
Sure, and you know, as Charles says, it's a very complicated issue. I mean, the idea of taking pre-existing conditions out of the whole equation, well, that's no longer insurance. That's everybody covering everybody, which is, you know, kind of where we are right now, and certainly where Obamacare is. And as Charles says, people don't want to acknowledge that you are asking somebody else who is working to pay taxes to cover someone else's pre-existing conditions, and it's a and I think that Jimmy Kimmel actually did go right much farther by saying that you know, you're not a decent person if you don't agree with Obamacare, and if you don't agree with, giving billions of dollars to a federal bureaucracy to support NIH funding. And to me, I find it very uncomfortable when especially when a famous person uses personal tragedy or anything like that and drags it into the political sphere and uses them as a political pawn.
Well, I felt the story.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people did.
I'm sure, and that's why it's so effective.
But I think in the end, the country has accepted that we do cover people with pre-existing conditions. The real question today is, how do you fund it? There are different ways, and I can't say that one is immoral and the other is moral.